Welcome to iDriveSoCal. I am Tom Smith, and I'm excited to have this conversation with a representative from SEMA, that is the Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association. And that is none other than Mr. Matt Daigle, who is the Director of Communications for Government Affairs, if I'm getting that correctly.
Yep, that's right.
Yes. Okay. And the impetus for today's talk is, of course, the end of EV mandates per the Senate vote yesterday, which is after the House vote earlier this month. But Governor Newsom in California are going to very likely continue to try to drive off the cliff of EV mandates. For the record, iDriveSoCal, and I believe, Matt will speak for SEMA in just a second. We love cars at iDriveSoCal. EVs are cars, therefore we love EVs. But the notion of mandates is beyond insane for lots of reasons. Matt, thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
Let's unpack all of this. Maybe starting at I mean, there's so many neighborhoods we can drive into, so many cul-de-sacs that we can drive into. I'll try to stop the puns. Let's just start with the background, and why don't you give it to us?
Yeah, so I think, what we had happen yesterday, and we're talking on a Friday, is really the culmination of 3 years of effort on SEMA's behalf. We kind of got an inkling that this EV mandate thing was going to be a big part of the discussion, and we understood how big of an impact it was going to have on the automotive aftermarket industry, which is a pretty big industry. It's $337 billion of annual impact. And when you start thinking about
is that U.S. or global?
This is in the U.S. alone. Yep.
Just $337 billion in the U.S. alone.
Yeah.
I didn't
1.3 million American jobs. This is all, American engineering and manufacturing and ingenuity, that sort of thing. And a third of our members are ICE engine vehicle dependent. They make products for the ICE engine. And when you look at
third, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess you have wheels and you have all kinds of other things that are outside of the internal combustion engine. So yeah. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. I'm probably going to do that a lot because I'm really excited to have this conversation. And there's, like I said, a ton of neighborhoods and cul-de-sacs I'd like to traverse down. So
ask any question at any point. You're good.
Excuse my enthusiasm.
No worries. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a third of our membership at SEMA. So you're looking at, if you take away, if you ban ICE engines, which is essentially what California was attempting to do, that's 100 billion, sorry, of economic impact. That's 330,000 American jobs. And so, we knew that was such a transformative thing, and a lot of people just didn't understand the scope of what was happening. I think there's a reasonable perspective to have if you're not paying attention, to go, well, this is California. What do we care about California? I live in Massachusetts, and my parents live in Massachusetts. That's a very real conversation I had. And I said, do you realize that you're one of the 11 states that has linked up with California and said, we're going to follow your emissions policies?
Right. So right there, how... I've had to read about this and reread about it. How has California captured so much power in the conversation?
Well, so the background on it is California had pollution problems and smog problems well before the Clean Air
Act. In the 70s.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about the 60s even.
60, okay.
And they had to take steps from a statewide perspective to make some changes and fix some things for California specific.
Logical then.
Yeah, it made sense. And when the Clean Air Act happened and formed the EPA as part of it under Richard Nixon, a Republican, in deference to California, they basically said, look, we're going to let you continue to do what you do. So you're going to have the opportunity to apply for waivers to go beyond what the federal government is enacting and requiring, and you just need to submit for a waiver, and then we'll take it into consideration under advisement, and we'll grant that waiver or we'll reject the waiver.
So hold on one second. So when the EPA was formed under Nixon, they said, "Hey, California, you are so expert. You're such experts in this that if you want to say something that it supersedes the EPA, we're good with that as of right now.
Yeah, expert, and also just, the issues in California were extremely different and more severe than they were in other parts of the country at that point. So it made sense to have them have this waiver authority. What happened over time
I'm sorry, man. One
was,
more question. Is that when
sure,
CARB was started, or was CARB started sometime thereafter?
I think CARB was probably started sometime thereafter. I'm not 100% on the history of CARB, but
Okay.
CARB became, the de facto body that kind of, oversaw these emissions things. So, um,
And for those unfamiliar, CARB is an acronym for the California Air Resources Board,
yeah,
and it is a board that is appointed by the sitting governor, if I'm getting
yep,
that right. So Newsom has appointed these board members. I think there's 11-ish
yeah,
of them who basically say, this is which way the wind's blowing on whatever we say. And then that kind of starts the ball rolling down the hill for what the Senate had to do on Thursday, which is take that power back essentially.
sure. And one of the reasons that, CARB states is what these a number of states, and some of them are linked to California for trucking policies, and some of them are linked for fleet policies. And what we're talking about today is specifically cars,
Right.
passenger vehicles, that sort of thing. But there were 11 states, 12 states when SEMA started identifying this as to being a real issue, that had basically said, we're going to follow California on this path towards mandating the sale of 100% sale of electric vehicles by 2035, and that's just going to be the law of how we treat things from a state level. That swath is substantial because when you look at the states and the populations of the states that are following this, we're talking about 40% of the country's population. So, one of the arguments that has been made about these waivers are that they're narrow and that they only really affect California. But when you start adding on the 11 states right now that follow them, it's not narrow. It's 40% of the country. That's a major portion of the consumer market for automakers, and that's why we knew we had to step in this and really start educating people, educating lawmakers on the real impacts of these. Talk about the deprivation of vehicle choice for the consumers and based on where they live and that sort of thing and what their needs were for their families and their businesses, but also just really just helping people understand what it means for California to set national standards like this.
And I mean, the reality is this is, I mean, you're in DC. This is a political issue. Every state that has signed on to California's guidance are blue states, correct?
I mean, some of them are battleground states. I mean, the idea of like, sort of purple, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Virginia being one of them. Virginia has had its share of Republican governors and Democrat governors in recent years. It so happened that when Virginia linked up with this, they had a Democratic governor, and when we started really pushing for against these EV mandates, we started in Virginia. A Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, had just taken control, and we were able to really just convince and help share what the impacts were going to be to the business community, to just consumers, that sort of thing, and really just reiterate that SEMA's never been anti-EV. If you've been to SEMA show, there were so many EVs. I had never seen so
Sure.
many Cybertrucks. I mean, they're pretty ubiquitous on the road right now, but I had never seen so many Cybertrucks in one spot as I saw last November at that SEMA show. Because people just love cars and EVs are cars. Our issue is that EVs don't work for everyone, that the idea of vehicle choice means, making a decision based on what your economic status is, what your overall needs are, what your travel needs are, how you're, where you're located. in this country, depending on whether you're in a rural or an urban environment or whatever. And it just wasn't going to work and be sustainable for the country to have mandates in place that basically said you could only have one kind of vehicle. It wasn't going to work for everyone. And this wasn't something everyone looks at, well, this is not till 2035. I mean, some of these goals, these milestones were ready to take effect in 2026. Like we're there. I
Yeah.
think 30% was supposed to be the number for now.
Yeah, and you can take a look at the numbers at the trajectory, and the moment that you take away the government subsidies, the trend of EV adoption goes away. I mean, if the government's not paying people to buy them, they're not buying them for the most part. I mean, not from a mandate perspective. Again, as you pointed out, as I pointed out at the top, definitely not against EVs. EVs are cars, love all cars. EVs love EVs. And in Southern California, there's an argument for them, right? If you have a very defined, have you lived here, Matt? Or have you just been an East Coaster and now in DC?
You know what? I was on the West Coast for a time being, but I was in Washington State.
Okay, gotcha. So in Southern California, you got to have a car. There's no two ways about it. And that's for your commute. And so therefore, EVs work fine if you have a defined commute where I know I can charge here. I know I can charge at home, at work. I'm good. And with iDriveSoCal, with our audience, I've got many people who have contacted me that are very against it, but are also kind of like Luke, not against. I need to specify, are very against EVs, but then others who like have a collection of cars, old hot rodders, guys in their 70s, 80s, saying, "Hey, you know what? I got my hot rods, I got my ice collectors cars, but we also have a couple of EVs in the family because they're great for our purposes, for bopping around town or going to and from work. So
Sure.
so that's all good, but I have family in the Midwest, and a summer or two ago we drove from Southern California to the Midwest, and forget it. We got outside of Vegas, and I think I could count the number of EVs that I saw on one hand. So it doesn't make sense for everyone. And the fact that the conversation is going to continue, this really drives me nuts. Newsom and his Attorney General, Rob Bonta, I believe his name is, they're planning to sue. Well, I think you know this topic better than me. So why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, they issued a statement. They had a press conference yesterday after this vote took place in the Senate that basically indicated that they're prepared to take legal action and sue, which it's hard to speculate on a case without having seen what they're filing and what their argument's going to be. I can say definitively that there's no legal recourse for overturning the Congressional Review Act when used. And I also would look at it from the perspective of you're not suing the Trump administration, you're suing the American people. The American people voted overwhelmingly for the candidate who was in favor of vehicle choice in the November elections. They voted against the candidate who wanted EV mandates in place. Um, and it's one of the reasons that SEMA got involved in the presidential election for the first time ever is because there was such a stark delineation between those two candidates. So, if they're going to go about this and continue to sue, I think they should look at it from the perspective of, this is a deeply, deeply unpopular policy. We know it from our data. We know it from how people voted. We know it from the fact that 35 Democrats in the House voted against EV mandates when given the opportunity, and we had a senator from Michigan, which again, blue state Democratic senator, who voted along with the rest of the Republicans yesterday in the Senate. So I mean, there is a very strongly held belief that vehicle choice is something that's an American right. I won't even get into the idea of like what car culture means to, California and the United States and all that stuff. That's all a really great, aspect of our culture. But at the end of the day, people think about it from the perspective of what's right for their family, what's right for their businesses. And if they don't feel like an EV is going to help suit their needs, it's just not going to work. So,
So you mentioned the votes. So
yeah.
the House was 246 to 164.
Mhm.
So the Republicans have a slim majority in the House, but that wasn't a party line vote at all.
No,
Um,
100%.
and then the Senate was 51 to 44.
And some people didn't vote, some they didn't show up, but you only need the 51 anyway. So
Okay, gotcha. So, but with Governor Newsom surely leaning into this because he has eyes on the White House himself, um, and he's just Newsom. Um, and then also you're personally in DC, but SEMA's based in Southern California.
correct.
I think a lot of people know that. Not everybody does. Their headquarters is in Diamond Bar.
Yep.
Um, so actually, two-part question. One, you guys weren't SEMA wasn't alone in pushing this agenda in Washington D.C. So who else was there with you? Number one, and then number two, how are you guys going to approach it as Newsom continues to push? And do you have anybody else with you on that resistance as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, knowing that there are a number of different aspects to the EV issue. It's not just about cars, it's about work trucks, it's about how fleets are used, that sort of thing. There's a lot of people in the DC association space, I guess you would say, that do look at this issue and are taking a very um, prudent perspective of it and saying, what is this? What does this mean to our members? What does this mean to the public at large? Um, the automakers have been, very much on board with, not having mandates in place. It's obviously something that, they're building great products, but
But
like,
is that across the board? Because I mean, I look at GM and it's like, back in the Obama cash for clunkers economic collapse situation, at least the first time that GM um, the acronym was used that stuck with me, Government Motors,
sure.
like it seemed to me Mary Barra and GM like we are all in on EVs. I mean, there's like they seem to have a deep investment in it.
Sure. I mean, I think you also have to be mindful of, like, which way the market is moving. And I think there was some growth at a point in the mid 2010s, that decade. There was substantial growth in that sector, and that there's some interest. And Tesla drove a lot of that. But then everyone's like, well, we make cars too. Like, let's see what we can do and what we can develop. I can say definitively that Toyota's never been 100% on the EV thing. They're
Yeah,
very gung
yeah.
ho about hybrids. And so, when you look at it from the perspective of, like, sales drive things, and they have not been able to lower the cost of these vehicles. They have not been able to convince people that the infrastructure is there to support that. Um, you know, some of the things that could come out of this next decade, where if we allow and support innovation, which I firmly believe that the automotive aftermarket is some of the best innovators in the nation, regardless of industry, right? What we've seen is their ability to develop cleaner burning, ICE
Yeah,
engine
yeah,
vehicles.
yeah, yeah.
The hybrid side of things is really great. The stuff that's being done in Australia for hydrogen is really interesting. And you would think about, like, if there's certainty that the end of this EV mandate stuff brings some certainty to the marketplace, it's going to allow investment. It's going to allow people to really put some resources behind the research and development needed to really get these things out to consumers and take them beyond concept and bring them into a fully functioning consumer model. Some of the things that are happening in Australia with hydrogen are really excited. So, those three things, cleaner burning ICE engines, hybrids, hydrogen, they can all piggyback on the existing infrastructure that we have in this country with gas stations. You don't need to put in chargers. You don't need to tax the power grid. You can have chargers. You can have the power grid, sustain a degree, but we're not forced to just kind of overhaul an existing infrastructure. We can start dropping those in, and that's going to be much more palatable for the American consumer. And the other side of it too is that it puts people in a footing where they understand what the technology is and how to manage it as a user. You know, it's very, very, there's a lot of added associated costs with repairing, EVs because of the high voltage of those batteries and everything. There's some special equipment that some of these garages need to invest in order to be able to do repairs on EVs. And it puts us back in a situation where we can rely on our neighborhood garages, the people that we know and trust, that will be able to do the repairs that need to be done, so that we can keep our vehicles longer and keep them repaired and keep them and modify them to the way that we want them to, and go from there. So it makes sense to look at the marketplace and go, well, so there's a lot of people in the DC, in the association, in the stakeholder space, that are looking at this and going like, yeah, this makes sense. Let's get behind it. And when you look at, how these numbers play with the American voter and the American consumer, it's a no-brainer.
So SEMA, as well as others, realize that the fight's not over. The war's
Sure.
not over. The battle's a big battle's been won, but
Yeah,
is
I mean,
that
I
an
think
accurate?
this it's
Is
a
that
reset. What is what it really is. And it's interesting because so the state of California just this morning announced that they're going to form a coalition of states that want to advance, cost cost cheaper, less expensive, clean cars, and we're all for that. I mean, again, we are not anti-EV. We're about, consumer choice. We're about vehicle choice. And if this helps expand the number of clean vehicles for consumers that are not just EVs, but can also be cleaner burning, ICE engines and hybrids and other powertrain technologies. Those are all good things. Those are all things that everyone wants. So, if we want to start playing, I think there's an opportunity for California here to say, how do we become a hub for innovation? How do we reclaim that mantle
how do we
of,
reclaim any industry whatsoever? Because everybody has left the state of
well, but you
California.
know what? Detroit Detroit had the car, and they produced the cars, and they sent them out across the country. And so the car was born in Detroit. The modern vehicle was born in Detroit. California, though, is where it was really, those vehicles became ingrained in the culture and the imagery of California. So can California then, invest some of this money instead of lawsuits? How about we invest the
Right.
money in, in research and development, and helping, that in the industry really stand up the next great thing within automotive technology. I mean, that's the opportunity here. Let's stop trying to fight and force people into a box when we can say, like, let's just get a bunch of boxes and make sure that the boxes are all, have the same specifications, essentially,
I love that theory. The reality is you have a Newsom and a bunch of the Democrat supermajority in Sacramento that their political career timeline doesn't fit in those parameters.
Sure.
So we'll see. But I love that idea and that concept. That brings up a thought that somebody shared with me in my audience, um, who commented on EVs, saying, again, I'm not ripping on EVs. I like them. They serve a purpose, but they said that it's EVs are typically soulless. And when I think about SEMA, I think about customs and hot rods, and really if you look up hot rod definition, like even Google will tell you that it's like, the origin came from people expressing their individuality
Sure.
and by way of car. And I just think that like the EV and the hot rod, they're like they couldn't be further apart in so many ways, but at the same time, they're still cars.
It's it's interesting because I think we do look at our cars and they become a part of our identity, whether it's just a bumper sticker or if it's modifications that make them look cooler or faster or allow us to take them into off-road spaces and that sort of thing. We had a bill in the California state legislature that would have incentivized people taking their existing vehicles and then converting them to EVs.
I remember that.
That passed the House, both chambers unanimously. When was the last time something passed unanimously in California? And it went to the governor's desk, and Gavin Newsom vetoed it. I mean, I think this is
Right.
something who knows? I feel like there was maybe a feeling that it conflicted with this goal of pushing, the EV makers and giving them the opportunity to really grab a foothold. But I think maybe that's time to revisit that. Let's give that opportunity back to, the lawmakers and see if that, if the governor has a change of heart so that, we can push this forward. Let's get the cars on the road that people want to have on the road, but give people the option. And if I can convert my vehicle to an EV, knowing that I go in and it's my choice because I know what the infrastructure is around it and I know how it's going to be, it's still going to be the vehicle that I can modify it because you're right. It's not soulless like some of the things that are coming off the production line now, but I can modify it as I see fit, including that engine train.
I mean, I think some EVs are pretty darn cool looking.
Yeah,
Going back to government motors, Chevy, a Silverado, electric Silverado that they just put out, and actually just the Silverado, electric Silverado that I see on the road right now, it's pretty darn eye catching. I don't think that we're going to see them on job sites anytime soon, but I don't know. Compliment to some of those designs. So I wanted to jump over to, you mentioned Australia and hydrogen, and I live in South Bay, Southern California, the South Bay area, and we have the Shell hydrogen station
hmm
that I think was announced was going to be closing. It's interesting. I ran into somebody at a restaurant, and her husband, she was driving a Toyota Mirai, which is the Toyota hydrogen vehicle,
sure.
and husband works for Toyota. She was driving one of those, and I think that's a great looking vehicle. Um, so much so that for a Toyota, I mean, it almost looks like a Lexus, which is obviously the luxury brand of Toyota. But I commented, I'm like, what? I either see that fueling station, the hydrogen fueling station, either completely empty or backed up with lines of people. And she said, well, it's because it's only open certain times.
Sure.
So another multi-part question for you, Matt. Sorry about that. But yeah, I remember George Bush, W. Bush, doing a press conference at a hydrogen fueling station saying, hey, this is going to be the future. What happened to hydrogen here in the United States, and what's going on with hydrogen in Australia?
My understanding is, and I'm not the technology guy. I'm not an engineer by any stretch, but my understanding is that they have taken the hydrogen thing very seriously down there, and they're making some real great innovations. And I think the thing you need to think about is how quickly technology is evolving these days and what 10 years can give us, right? So if you have and I think the nice thing about the CRA is that it's pretty definitive. It means that you can't push something through that's similar. It'd have to be completely wholesalely different in terms of like legislation or policy. Um, it's going to bring that certainty back to the marketplace that was that sort of Damocles that was hanging over our head like, well, we've got this administration now. What happens during the next election with a different administration? If it's a different
Right.
party in power, how do they view things? Are we just going to be swinging back and forth, and then we're just, that's that push pull and tug of war, and just no one gains from that. It's very hard to make long-term investments in research and development if you feel like in 4 years, 3 years that things are just going to be completely undercut from you. That's not great for, that's not a good foundation to operate a business. I think the certainty that comes from here is going to be very important because it's going to allow those investments to be made that we can look at and say, all right, we're heading down this road. We're going to see where we can bring this and, what needs to be done and, start thinking about these problems from, on a long-term basis because we have the ability to say the landscape is going to be relatively unchanged over the next decade now because we've got that certainty that just came from the vote in the Senate.
So I've read about the question of was the CRA, which stands for
Congressional Review Act.
So I've read some stories that have said there was pushback from
The
certain
parliamentarian.
Democrats, the
Is this the
parliamentarian, yeah,
parliamentarian issue? Yeah,
saying you can't even do that. So
sure.
is California is California and whatever other states that are going to band together with them, are they going to have a legal platform to say, hey, you had those vote or you had the vote, and we lost, but it was not legitimate to begin with. So that's our premise for kind of starting all over with the insanity. Is that possible? I mean, I know you're not a legal scholar, but
Yeah, so I mean, I think you have to look at it from the perspective of how this all evolved. So, the California requested this waiver last January, I think is the time frame. It was early 2024, and the Biden administration sat on it for
right
practically
until
a year.
until after the election because
Right,
they knew that they knew it was going to blow up in their face.
right. So when a federal policy is enacted by, it usually goes through a review period. And when that happens, it is then submitted um, to Congress to with the option of exercising their Congressional Review Act authority, which basically means that they can have a resolution and then there's a majority vote and they can say it's good or it's not good. Um, these these waivers were never submitted to Congress. The argument behind it that was being made by the EPA was that they were narrowly applicable, meaning that they only impacted California. So this wasn't something that was broadly. The definition of a policy that needs to be submitted to Congress is something that needs to be broadly applicable. The California waivers were deemed by administrators and bureaucrats in the EPA as being narrowly applicable. When you start thinking about, again, those 11 CARB states, that 40% of the country, it's clear that they're not narrowly applicable. They're not specific just to California. They're now very, very applicable to the country as a whole. So when we started immediately pushing this idea of using the Congressional Review Act because if you move these things over and give them their day in Congress, essentially, we felt strongly that the message would resonate and that the right thing would be done, and that's what happened. So when President Trump took office in January, one of the first things he did in his day one executive orders, and there were a ton of them, and it was hard to keep track of everything, but one of
Yeah.
those day one executive orders was he wants the EPA to take a full accounting and review of their policies and submit ones that hadn't been submitted to Congress for consideration, and that's exactly what happened. So it was right before President's Day. I think it was Valentine's Day when these things got transmitted initially, first to the House and then later to the Senate. Um, and then the way that it works from there is the Congressional Review Act. There is no legal recourse for overturning the Congressional Review Act. It's pretty straightforward.
So, to the
That's
best of your knowledge, we should be safe.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, this is something that should have been done to begin with, and and the idea that this will undermine the filibuster and everything. It's like no, because very few waivers and policies are not submitted to Congress for review. These things happen all the time, and Congress just goes, they're fine. They did a good job. They wrote it. Most of the action that happens on policies is when, when Congress adopts a law and says, "Hey, go ahead and implement this," and then the federal agency will start their process of implementing it. If you don't feel like they're implementing it to the spirit of how the law was written, there might be a conversation there, and then there usually the regulatory agency will come back and make some changes. But in terms of this, I mean, I think it's pretty solid footing that there's going to be very little that they can do to convince a court that what was done was inappropriate.
So then, how do you guys at SEMA see California's lawsuit to come? How do you see it playing out? A little bit of noise now, and then kind of just dissipates, goes away,
Lawsuits
or
are expensive and boring, and they take a long time.
Newsom doesn't care. He's spending our money. He's spending the taxpayers' money. He don't
Right,
care.
and I think that's a question that he should really be, asking, and that's something that, the California taxpayers should be asking of him is this the right way to use our resources when we have a lot of other issues that we could be focusing on? Again, even just investing it into figuring out what the next generation and next technology breakthrough is for the automotive space. Let's do that. Let's be more practical with this money and use it towards something that would be great. So as opposed to another lawsuit.
I mean, it, it's driven me nuts. Even though I love all cars, including EVs, they're not greener. They make sense for very few people, and it's impossible to separate the EV push from the whole potentially Green New Deal political agenda. And on top of it all, just about every EV, less Tesla, but even to some degree, Tesla has some connectivity to China. But all the other EVs have connectivity to enriching China. And I noticed that when I started iDriveSoCal back in 2017, going to the LA Auto Show's automobility press days, like it was one new EV startup company after another. And when you really kind of look down to who's behind these, where's the money coming behind these, it was always connected to Chinese money. Do you that might what if anything does SEMA what if anything does SEMA have to say or stance on that bigger picture of the EV question?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we should be emphasizing, American made. And I think that's really, from our perspective, that's the heart and soul of the automotive aftermarket is American made. And we're seeing that with how the tariff discussion is playing out. A lot of our members have, they've already brought their operations back to the United States or in the process of doing so, or really just kind of divested themselves of the China the China landscape essentially because at the end of the day we believe that the best products are designed here, the best products are manufactured here. We can only speak for how some vehicles are produced, and certainly I think you're probably referencing like BYD and some of those other Chinese EV
Yeah, there was
makers.
I want to say there was one called Byton or yeah, Byton, I think was one
It
that was
became BY. That's what became BYD, from my
is that what it
understanding.
was
That
it
was that was the Americanization
I
of the
mean, those
company.
guys, that was like one of the last big. Have you ever been? I'm sure. Have you been to the LA Auto Show? That specifically they used to have like a
No, I
press.
heard it's awesome, but
They used, unfortunately, it shrunk a lot.
yeah,
I'm really hoping it comes back.
sure.
Um, but But when I first started iDriveSoCal, again, 2017, I think they had one more year of, maybe in 2018, a full week of press days. Now it's like a half day is like the press event, and then they open to the public. But it used to be, and I remember, I guess what BYD became Byton, the money that this company had to spend. I mean, they just owned it for days, and their vehicle was, you couldn't miss it. I mean, everything, you had to walk around the vehicle. But the amount of money that was spent on that, and then also any other, um oh, Faraday Future, that was another one.
Sure.
um I had literally had friends that have worked for them, and moved around the world working for them, and now I don't know if they're even around anymore. uh the list of failed EV companies goes on. um but I digress. Again, my enthusiasm for the overall topic, and having this conversation with you. Um, the the I want to talk a little bit about, before we started this talk, recording. You mentioned SEMA's involvement in autonomous, and I had no idea that you guys were involved in autonomous.
Not so much autonomous, but the ADAS stuff, the advanced driver assistance systems. Those are the
Okay.
automatic braking. Those are the, all those sensors that, help you blind spot monitoring, all that stuff. We see that as being a very important conversation in the very near future. Frankly, because, our cars are computers now,
Right.
and so everything is largely, and I'll give you a great example. I have a Subaru, and I was driving it with my wife, and suddenly every light on the dashboard blew up out of nowhere. And
Always
it
fun.
freaked me out. I was just like, what just happened here?
Yeah.
But the car was driving fine, and I didn't understand what was going on. So I, didn't feel like, after, because the car was driving fine, started trying to make some calls to the garages to see when I could get it in or whatever. But the car was not impacted, except all the advanced safety features that this model has. So I have, like, Subaru has eyesight, so you can
Right.
it's telling you, that's part of your cruise control, but it's also automatic braking, and it'll tell you when someone's cutting in front of you, and it'll start, like, really chirping at you. I've got the rear braking aspect of it. I've got blind spot monitoring on the sides when I'm signaling. All that stuff was disabled. So it was really interesting when I went in to have that car looked at. They said, "Oh yeah, so here's what happened. You've got a little bit of a buildup or block. Something's in your engine, and it just kind of messed with the sensor." So, and I was just like, so they're like, the solution is that we're going to flush your engine 4 times, and so it's basically 4 oil changes, and then you're good to go. And I was like, and that shut down all my safety features.
Really.
It was really illuminating. And when you start realizing how integrated our cars are, they're more computers than the vehicles that, people worked on in the 70s and 80s even. So that's going to be the next landscape, is making sure that, we understand those things, that when people modify their vehicles, that they're not inadvertently disabling some important features. If these features become, mandated, or, at the federal level, just like how, rear-facing cameras are, we want to be at the forefront of that conversation, because the aftermarket has always been, at the tip of the spear um, for safety. Everyone sees, the flashy cars, and, the tuners, and, getting it fast for the track and everything. But at the end of the day, like, my big boss, the CEO of SEMA, used to sell rear-facing cameras well before, they were placed in every new vehicle.
Is that
Um,
right?
yeah, yeah, Mike Spagnola used to sell rear-facing cameras, um, among other things, obviously. So, it's one of those things that, we want to make sure that, people that modify their vehicles are able to get the right information for systems to make sure that things remain calibrated. That if you lift a vehicle, 2 inches so that you can, use it to work on your farm or to take it off road or whatever, that you're not like screwing up everything. So we've invested a quite amount of money and time and thought into how these ADAS systems are really affecting, vehicles and where things are going with that. We know that this is going to be at the tip of the tongue of probably every lawmaker in Washington, D.C. starting next year, because that's when Waymo is going to show up. So Waymo is going to be in D.C. with their driverless taxis next year. And
Is
so
that right?
the first time that, a lawmaker gets in a vehicle on his way to a vote, and then they realize, oh, there's no driver. What are we doing about this from a policy standpoint? We want to make sure we've had these
Oh no. What happened?
resource and help them out understand what's at stake. Sorry?
You just froze for some reason.
Oh,
Oh
I'm sorry.
no.
No, I was just talking.
Uh okay. I think we're good.
Okay.
I don't know. You just froze. So you were talking about DC Waymo's going into DC, and the first time lawmakers get into a Waymo, that the policy is going to get pushed to the forefront on that.
Yeah, and the highway bill's not going to be next year too, and that's where all this stuff is going to be kind of written into it, and we start, developing new regulatory pathways. I think at the end of the day, everyone wants safe vehicles, and we want to make sure that these vehicles can remain, calibrated to the way that they're supposed to. But we want to understand what modification does to that, and we want to, make sure that people are going to be modifying their vehicle. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that they're able to do so and keep their vehicle safe.
I wouldn't have guessed that the scope of SEMA is so broad. I
Yeah,
my conception, and I mean, and I think there's I'm pretty studied on it. I started iDriveSoCal. I cover it on a daily basis. But my scope is pretty broad as well. But my assumption was always more that SEMA, hey, that's where you go see the over the top, custom, beautiful works of art, um, and amazing performance from artisans and top tech companies in Vegas once a year. You guys are much bigger than that.
yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you look at it where we have those great builds that you see at SEMA show, but you also have like a lot of engineering prowess that's really innovating how our cars are safe and comfortable and and perform better. We represent people that love exploring the off-road spaces of this nation and being able to take their cars out to that. We love the people that are restoring the old classics. And we represent the enthusiasts too. They're not our business members per se, but like those are the people that our member companies, they market to and sell to, and they develop products for. Those are the people that keep automotive culture alive and well in this country. They're the ones that really spoke up on behalf of this EV mandate stuff and helped get that across the finish line. We had 56,000 letters that came through for the EV mandate stuff. So everything we're doing has always got those people in mind, and knowing that their vehicles are going to have a very specific set of functionality with regards to safety products and how that might interwork with modifications. I think it's going to be very important that someone that understands their needs has a seat at the table. We convened a symposium. So SEMA has two garages, one in Diamond Bar and one in outside of Detroit in Plymouth, Michigan. And these are they're research and development facilities essentially. We use them to, bring in, vehicles so that, from the OEMs so that our members can do some measuring sessions. But we're also doing the California garage is very focused on emissions and making sure that, we understand, how things are going from that side of things. The Detroit garage is very focused on the ADAS systems and how they play. And so I was out there 2 weeks ago. It is super impressive to see, what this facility is able to do and help people understand the impact of these systems on your driving experience and your safety experience, and what happens when you do this to this and do this to this, and if it's got a sensor in the front, but you want to move it to the side because you want to put in a bumper that's got a winch, like what's going to be the impact? How do you calibrate it differently? These are all conversations that we want to make sure that we're leading on, and making sure we're bringing in the right people to speak with authority and expertise, so that the cars of the future are the right cars for the drivers.
So, full disclosure, I'm not a member of SEMA,
Sure.
but I
We can change that. We can get you into the SEMA Plus membership.
I I get SEMA's newsletter. I link to stories within iDriveSoCal's newsletter, and I think sometimes on the website as well, uh, regularly. And I know you guys have a rally that you're trying to do. I can't remember if it's Sacramento or DC. I think it's Sacramento, but I think
The
it's your
California
members.
rally is coming up.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
So, it's very similar to what we do in DC, where we bring in advocates, people, and I think it's very important to separate politics from advocacy, if that makes sense.
It's
A lot of
hard.
people, well, a lot of people get really
Conceptually,
uncomfortable with.
it's hard. Maybe in reality, it's not so difficult. But I think from
I
the
think
layman's.
politics is about parties. Advocacy is about issues, and I think we can look at issues from a very bipartisan nature. And I think that's why the EV mandate stuff was very effectively communicated. And because what we're going to do is we're going to bring in people that want to advocate on behalf of the automotive community, on behalf of the businesses that are part of the automotive aftermarket and support the automotive community, and give them the opportunity to meet with their lawmakers and talk about the issues, and get comfortable with that idea of saying, this is how it's going to impact me. This is why this is good, or this is why this is bad. A lot of the conversation will probably be about Leno's Law,
Yeah.
which we got some great news on today. It's moving to the Senate floor for a vote, and it's got bipartisan support right now. So, those are the things that we are actively, trying to get people engaged on, because we can say it from an organizational standpoint, but it's more effective when it's coming from the people that are really impacted, and that's just the constituents.
So the California rally
Yeah.
is for SEMA members, correct?
I think it's for enthusiasts. If an
Overall,
automotive enthusiast wants to be part of it, we'll take them. We'll be there.
because I've been covering a lot about gas prices here in California. That's a whole nother issue. Like,
Sure.
I don't know if you've read those recent stories, but this time next year, there's speculation that we could be paying $8, close to $9 a gallon, because the genius that is Newsom and the Democrat supermajority in Sacramento. So I in my newsletter, which goes out to almost 20,000 people, with a huge open rate, very engaged, awesome audience. I love you guys. Thank you for paying attention to what we're talking about. But I sent out a poll, and I think I had almost just the very bottom of my newsletter, like 70% of the respondents were like, yeah, I'd do a rally on gas prices. But I wonder if there's something that we could potentially tie into in support of, because what you're saying is your SEMA rally, it's not just for SEMA members, or your California rally is not just for SEMA members, and it's not just one particular issue, it's multi-issue. Is that what I'm gathering?
Yeah, so we're big tent. We like to bring in people under the whole, like, if you're an enthusiast and you want to speak on behalf of the industry, we're gonna have you here. We found it to be very effective. So when we were really pushing to start getting the word out about the EV mandates and the CRA stuff that was happening in February and in March, we pulled together very on very short notice, 30 of our members, but then also a dozen content creators that are just automotive enthusiasts that are in the space that, they care and they wanted to come out and they wanted to talk about this issue. You go to some of the offices for these meetings with lawmakers, and they go, "Oh yeah, no, we're on board with that. What else is going on in your world?" And you start talking about some of those things, because I think at the end of the day, we want policies that support, these businesses, small, the majority of SEMA members, and especially in California, are small businesses. So what are the policies that they need? If you're a fan of racing, let's figure out how we can keep racetracks open and make those sustainable so that people have a place that they can go and safely and legally, scratch that itch, and engage with the community that forms around racetracks. There's a lot of issues that we've got, and I think if you go to SEMA's page, SEMA.org/advocacy, you'll see all those different issues that we're engaged on. Gas prices is a little bit of a big one, and it's not one that we're focused on because it's almost like too unwieldy to,
Yeah.
to be dealing with that one. But there's a number of things that we're going to be talking about. And I think Leno's Law is a great example of, like, it's a common sense thing. Let's not, like, cap it at 1985. Let's have a rolling 35-year thing so that, I look at those cars that I saw in the Fast and the Furious and I go, it would be really great to drive, to have, Brian's car from that movie, could I don't know how my wife would feel about it, but and to be able to have that and be, that's now going to be, almost a 25-year-old vehicle. And so you would start running afoul with all these smog regulations in California. So it's like, how do we get it so that people can the next generation can really just start collecting the cars that resonate with them. It doesn't have to necessarily. I don't think the DeLorean from Back to the Future is eligible yet, but that's like a seminal car for me. I mean, that's like every time I see one at a car, like I'll walk down the street and the downtown area of my town has a car show every summer, and there's a guy that brings a DeLorean, and I'm always taking a picture with the DeLorean, sending it to my friends, and there's like, that is so cool. It's like, I know it's cool. It's like those are the touch points, the cultural touch points, the shared culture that we have, that make you smile and make you say, like, cars are pretty cool. Like, and to be able to have, something like Leno's Law on the books that, encourages people and preserves these vehicles and encourages people to possibly buy them from a collector standpoint and keep them, running and bring them to events and share them with the community. That's really good stuff. That's something that everyone can get behind. We have a lot of issues like that. Keeping access open to, some of our public lands like Oceano Dunes and, Moab and all these spaces, nationwide that were basically, they're there to be explored. So if you have something like, let's if there's a community that needs some support to keep those spaces open for the purpose of the enthusiasts, but also, the tourism that gets, that gets driven by, and the economic impact that gets driven by people that are coming to the community to go out on those off-road spaces. Those are all things that SEMA is engaged with because they're good for the automotive community.
how how many employees does SEMA have?
Hmm. Jeez, now you're putting me on the spot.
I
The
know you
mo
said you got about 8 in DC, and you're adding a couple.
Yeah, we've got a
Um,
couple spots. Yeah, we're
but there's
gonna
got
be.
to be there's got to be a bunch more in Diamond Bar, I'd
There's a
assume
couple
too.
hundred in Diamond Bar. Yeah.
Okay.
And we're a typical automotive association. We've got a lot of our focus is on, making sure that the show is a successful event every year and that, we get all the companies in that want to be able to exhibit and, that, we're going to be expanding the Friday day. So that's going to be open to public now. So that's
Oh,
going to be very,
really?
yeah. So Friday, SEMA show, open to the public on Fridays. And you actually can get a discounted ticket if you're a member of the SEMA Plus membership, which is our rank, for the enthusiast community membership for SEMA.
Okay. So
But
that is there just the So SEMA's every year in
Las Vegas,
Vegas, and is
160,000 people.
there just one Friday, or does it span 2 Fridays?
No, the show starts on Tuesday. It goes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday's the last day of the show.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well,
And
that
then
makes
last
sense.
last year we had SEMA Fest that wraps it up at the end of the day, and we had, so it's a big concert, and you can get tickets for that. We had Sublime last year. We had Cage the Elephant. We had just some really good bands. So it was a lot of fun. It's a massive show. We filled the entire Las Vegas Convention Center, maxed out, and it's you bring a good pair of walking shoes if you're going to go because there's a lot to see and there's a lot going on. It's the first time you go, it's you go, "Well, I heard it's big," and then you go, this is really big. And but it shows like the broad scope of like, of the aftermarket, of the community of enthusiasts, how varied people's, interests are within the automotive community. That some people love just, a fast car that they can bring to the track, and some people just love, what's the latest in, wrap and accessory technology to make it look cool. And then, there's people that are just like, I just want a car that's like just gets me around and is safe and, and whatever. So
Cars are super cool. There's so many different genres, and I get people ask me like, "Oh, what's your favorite? If you could have anything," it's like, I don't know. It's like there's so many. I mean, and I personally appreciate absolutely everything, from a from a Yugo, a Nissan Versa, to a hypercar, to a Zinger.
and
Um,
everyone has like it's one of the few things that we all share, right? In this country, regardless of where you grew up and what your political beliefs are and your socioeconomic status and all that stuff. We all have an experience in a car and some memory. We either saw one in a movie or we had that special vehicle that we like, there's people that are like, man, you know what? I really love those station wagons that had the way back because, they used to toss like five kids in the back there, no seatbelts. Everyone's just like, on a drive. It's just, I mean,
we had one of those when I was a kid. We actually
right.
had two of them. We had one of them. I think one of them that the back jump seat was facing backwards, and then the
Yep.
next one was like fancier, and they flipped up, and you faced each other. And I think that one did have seat belts, but yeah, wow,
Probably
that
lap
thing,
belts.
yeah, oh yeah, of course,
Yeah.
it wasn't anything special.
But like
And
I didn't grow up in a car family really, to be completely honest. And my knowledge of vehicles themselves, I'm still learning. It's one of those things that,
there's so much to know. You can't
there's
you
so
can't
much
know
to
it all.
know.
I mean, you can't. There's and you know so your background, in this talk is the Japanese domestic market, and I used to just refer to that as the tuner kids, right? The Fast and the Furious kids.
Sure.
Um, but now it's not. It's like, well, they're not kids anymore. They're grown adults. They're men and women.
And
uh,
and and, and you were asking about it, and it was one of those things where it stems from the 80s, that 80s aesthetic that, because I had it on my Trapper Keeper when I was like in second grade and like, cool cars. And then you grow up and you have maybe a Lamborghini poster on the wall or something like that. And I mean, there's so many different touch points that can make you really just appreciate, people that know cars, love cars. We all share that experience. It might be a movie, it might be the family vehicle, and there's something in between for everyone. That's why it's such a cool community, and that's why if there's an issue that's important to these people, it's going to be important to SEMA, and we're going to do our best to engage people and help them understand how they can speak on behalf of their enthusiasm and their industry, and really make a difference on behalf of the entire community as a whole.
well, hey Matt, we've covered a lot of territory here. I thank you very much for your time. We initially got on this call to talk about the death of the EV mandate, which
Sure,
California will,
I
of
know.
course, continue to try and push. But and I'm thinking out loud here, but I'm thinking, when is your California rally?
It's coming up in June. I can get you those dates so you can share them with your audience.
Yeah, we
But
might
I
we
would
might try
encourage
to.
people, if they want to get involved and get engaged, the SEMA Action Network is the best place to start with. And you can go onto Instagram and follow SEMA Action Network, 3 words, no spaces, and that's where a lot of our enthusiast focused advocacy activity stems from. So we've got it's a really cool Instagram presence. So, and it was a big part of this EV mandate stuff. It's a big part of the Leno's Law stuff, and it's going to be a big part of the issues that we've got coming down the road.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add? I like I said, we've covered a ton of stuff, but
Um,
and I definitely want to do this again with you. I think there's going to be lots more to talk about as time moves on, but
yeah, no, I think just to reinforce that, like, don't just think SEMA's the show. We're more than that. We're very much, working to protect the rights of the automotive community, and that's always going to be our North Star.
all right. Matt Daigle, the director of communications for SEMA governance, no, government affairs,
That's right.
right? Thank you again. For iDriveSoCal, I'm Tom Smith. We'll talk to you again real soon. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.